Hey everyone, it's Shavon Lindley, and we're here for our live Q&A session on October 25th, 2016. We're going to be talking in more detail about the Owning Your Voice module. And to be honest, this is my favorite module. And so I've gotten some of your questions in advance, but I also want to remind you that the chat function of Zoom is the perfect place to ask questions. So if I'm in the middle of a thought, I'll see that little pop up, and when I'm in the middle of a question, that will trigger me to go take a peek. So make sure and use that functionality so that way I can answer your questions live here on the spot. And I'm also recording this session, so we'll get the replay up. So if you don't get a chance to stick your way through the whole thing, you'll be able to watch it later. So let's stick right in. So I'm going to give you some background information on some of the videos that are in the program. We'll look at the workbook too and some of the exercises that I think are really critical to take a peek at or to dig deeper in if you haven't looked at them in a while as a refresher. But the first lesson in this module is knowing when to speak up and when to listen. And it's such a critical first step before we do anything is understanding what our role is in a conversation. And Jennifer always had a really difficult time in meetings. She talks about being in a very fast-paced, aggressive environment at her job and never knowing when to insert a point. If she did need to insert, it felt like she had to scream or yell or be really loud, and that was just not natural to her. And so she didn't want to seem aggressive herself. And so if she waited potentially too long to chime in with her opinion, sometimes it was too late. And, they've already moved past that on another issue. And so really always caught in this, not knowing when and do that. So Marina had some advice, and it was about understanding your role or what your role is in the meeting. So is the purpose of the meeting informational? Are you just collecting information about, research that was done or a new project idea, and you're not making any big decisions, you're just gathering information? So in that type of a meeting, you know that you don't necessarily need to speak up or to have a loud voice. You can sit back passively and just digest the information and really do a good job of trying to listen to everybody who may be giving you these facts. And however, if you're on the flip side and you're in a meeting and the purpose of that meeting is to decide an outcome that you probably are going to have to live with for a significant period of time, this is a meeting where not only do you need to make sure and listen, but if there is something that comes up that you need to, that you have a counter idea to, or that you want to dig further in, or you have questions about, this is an opportunity where you really have to have a louder voice. And so that's really some of the first steps that we have to look at. And I'm going to dig into the workbook a little bit because I love some of the advice here. So hopefully you can see my screen right now, and I pulled open the workbook, and I'm on page 3. And there's really great advice here. Obviously, the first step is, knowing your role. And then knowing what your responsibility is, which we just talked about. But then there's some really great advice on how to listen. And why is it so difficult? Probably because we have a million thoughts going on, and we already know where we want the conversation to go. And so we have this preconceived idea of, I need to get this point across. And so a lot of times that takes us away from really being able to listen and realizing that we probably do that more than we should. And now that I'm more aware that I recognize how often I really do that, and I try and take that step back and really breathe and try and not think about how am I going to say this later that'll be the most impactful, which I typically do. So sometimes now I'll write my idea down so I don't forget about it. Then I can stop thinking about trying to remember what I was going to say, and I can start thinking about what they're saying. And not speaking over people if possible, and not trying to take things personally. Marina says something about that there's very rarely anything personal in the workplace. And sometimes when we hear things that may seem like feedback or negative feedback, it's really difficult to not take things personally and to really get kind of on the offense. And breathing is, which I should do right now, is some of the best way that we possibly can reset ourselves from maybe an emotional conversation or an aggressive situation to really think about, how can I do a better job of trying to understand what's going on around me at this time? And to repeat for clarification if needed. I had a really hard time with asking people to repeat what they said. I actually also have, especially growing up, I had very much an auditory ADHD. My challenge was always when listening and hearing other people was always a hard thing. And so because I would need to ask to repeat for clarification like 20 times, I always got really self-conscious about that part of me. And so it shut me down a lot. And so I know when Jennifer talks about this story in there about a guy in her office who was using this acronym KTPR or KTBR, and she doesn't know what it means, and she can't stop thinking about like how she doesn't know what that means, and should she ask, should she not, and it makes her stop paying attention to really what's going on because she's so worried about not understanding what was just said. And so she waits until after the meeting to ask him what the acronym was, and it was something really simple like keep the business running or something like that. And I just really related to her because I have somebody on my team who is like the complete opposite personality of me. He speaks in acronyms all the time. He uses analogies for absolutely everything. And I have to really think about what he says. And when there's so many things going on, I have to repeat for clarification multiple times throughout the meeting. And in the first few months of working with him, I rarely ever did. And I spent most of the time thinking that I was the idiot not understanding. And, I did go to him after the meetings a few times to ask, and what he was saying was so important that I felt like the idiot for not having the confidence to say something to him in the meeting, because it really would have been really important, because I may not have been the only person that didn't understand. And usually there was always some other person that was thankful that he did explain it again, because it was a really important point and we didn't get to dig into it in the meeting and other people didn't get their input. And so, I've learned over time to, especially with him, that it's okay to repeat for clarification. And that's a critical piece that I need to really be able to listen, and to not have to worry about what he said, to ask him later. Like, I just do it in the moment, and not doing it aggressively or in any judgmental way to him. But that's been a really important step for me in how I've been able to learn how to really listen and get over my own challenges or my own insecurities that I might have. And so there's a really great, I love in this section on page 4, this tip right here. And it's talking about in a situation where maybe you're in a meeting with somebody and they're bringing up an idea that maybe you don't necessarily agree with. You have a completely different idea, but it's not the appropriate thing to do to just say, no, that's a bad idea. How about my idea? Like, that's not, an effective way to speak up. It's demeaning to that other person, and it discredits what they said. And maybe you misunderstood them. And so a really simple way that a senior VP at a Fortune 100 company taught me one time, and she's just said, you know what? If somebody says something that I don't necessarily agree with, I don't say no. I say yes, and then I follow that up with my idea. So the example in the book says, let's say a colleague says, I think we need a new product line extension. And maybe you don't think necessarily we need to do that, because you think we need to probably assess, consider a lot of other things, our competitors, before we just throw out a new line. So instead of saying no, you say yes, and we should also take into consideration reviewing other competitors' products first. So you're saying the same thing, but in a way that shows that you really were listening and that you heard them. And you're also inserting your idea at the same time. So it's a really simple little twist or trick that can be really helpful. And I don't know, I'd love to see if anybody's used that tip. I see it. And let me just look at the chat box because I see you all right now. Yes, a couple of you. I know it's amazing how some simple things like that can really help, take some of the, heat out of a situation, especially like Jennifer works in a very aggressive environment. And so that is definitely an area that, there are simple ways to be able to do that. And there's some great advice. So that's teaching some ideas on how to listen, but some suggestions on how to speak. When you're finally saying, what you need to say, you have to choose your time wisely. I know that if I'm going to go ask something really critical of someone, and actually someone came into my office today to ask for my feedback on something, and he asked me if I had time, and I said yes, and really I didn't. I don't know why I said yes, but I didn't. And then he asked me, and then I got frustrated with him for asking me that question. And I knew it in the moment, but it was my fault. It was my fault because he did ask for my time, and I said yes anyway because, I didn't really know if the question was going to be short or long. It ended up being long, and then it just frustrated me. So why couldn't I have just in that moment taken a deep breath and said, you know what, I'm actually about to leave in 5 minutes. I'm kind of running behind. Is this something that's critical right now, or can we talk about it later? Now that I say that in hindsight, it's like, okay, that would have made him feel really good. It would have validated, him without shutting him down and making me seem so busy and frantic and that I didn't have time for him. So we all can evolve in our skill set, but to recognize that now, for me, I recognized it right away because I walked away from that meeting not feeling very good. Well, not that meeting, but that situation, kind of rushing out the door. And he's a relatively new team member. And so now, I feel like I maybe came off aggressive and I didn't really want to. So, this was an opportunity for me that I'll do this a little bit differently next time. And, when somebody initiates a conversation with me, or I'm initiating a conversation with them saying, hey, this is only going to take 1 minute, or do you have time right now? This is what I want to talk about. Can we do it a little bit later? Really making intentions clear in regards to that. So I'm going to take a peek at my notes because there's so many components to this section because it's not only knowing when, but it's also knowing about how. And I know in here there's also a communication plan that's included in this section. And if you haven't really done it, I can see that this may be a section that's easy to overlook. I don't want to create a communication plan right now before entering a high stakes conversation or negotiation. So, you can skip over this to do it later, and then you never end up going to it. But print this page right now and just take a look at it. It really can serve all of us so well to really take an opportunity to really think through things or ideas that we want to accomplish. Because, like I said, you've already done the work from Module 1 about knowing what you want and why. Now it's about implementing those steps. And this communication plan is going to take you through the 3 things that you need to really think about before you ask for whatever it is that you want. So it's asking you, what's your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? What's your desired target outcome? Here the example is, I want to lead the next project pitch. Okay, maybe it's about a salary negotiation. Maybe it's about taking one of your projects off of your plate because it's not in alignment with your core values. So what's your desired target outcome? And then you're going to create a list of questions that directs the discussion and gives you the information you need to build your case. So what are the facts, as Marina likes to say? What are your facts that you want to get out there, that you need to? So what are the questions you want to ask? What are the facts that you're going to build your case? And this is how you can remember to write those thoroughly out there. And then what's going to be after this important meeting? What are the follow-up items? So this section is going to be, once you've had the conversation, what do you need to do afterwards, which is probably just as important as the prior two, because if you get what you need and there's follow-up and you don't follow up, then now you're potentially impacting your credibility in the organization because you're not following through with some of the things that you said that you wanted to do. So this is a really critical component to really think about adding a communication plan to daily conversations if you need to, until it becomes habit. And in the workbook, we suggest, using your communication plan, at least once a week for the next 3 weeks, for supervisor meetings, for meeting with colleagues, even meetings with clients, and really just helping to create clear, directed, and actionable ways that we can make sure and get our things across. And notice how the quality of our communication really changes and our outcomes change when we take the time to be thoughtful. And how many things are come to fruition because you said you wanted them. Maybe you didn't, you probably didn't realize that your boss didn't know you wanted to do all of these things. And because you brought them up, a lot of things are happening now because of it. And so some of the reflection questions in this section, I absolutely adore. They're my favorite questions, I think, in the whole program as a whole. And the first question in particular: has your silence ever cost you an opportunity? I mean, I don't think there's a person out there that wouldn't raise their hand and say that, there wasn't a time where you didn't speak up and you missed out on something that you didn't want to. Have you ever responded in charged a reactive way to criticism or a review? Right? Have you ever asked for a raise or promotion? This is such an interesting question, and there's been so many studies, some really recent studies I wish I had in front of me, or I would share with you right now, that Sheryl Sandberg and the people over at Lean In McKinsey have just come out with in the Women in the Workplace study. And it's really the staggering percentage of the number of women who have never asked for a raise or a promotion. And for whatever reason. And to really think about, why haven't I ever done that? And why may that be a block that we have? And, after Lean In came out, there was a surge of people who were asking for a raise, but they were asking for a raise because they thought that they should. They weren't going in with their case. Does that make sense? Maybe because I remember reading a lot about this, because there was a huge kind of backlash from some company saying, all of a sudden I got all of these women just saying, hey, I want a raise, without substantiating why. And that's the critical piece that we'll actually talk about that in particular in complete detail in the module Owning Feedback and Critique, which is in module 4. How do you ask for a raise and a promotion? How do you prepare for your performance review? All of those things are linked together. So we'll dig a lot deeper into that, but it all begins with this communication plan. So no matter where you are at in your career development, this communication plan is critical. And you really have to have written out what your case is for whatever it is that you want to do, and what your value is to the organization, and why should you, work on this project and take this other project off your desk. How will that impact the organization? How will that not only make you happier because you're spending time on things that you love, but how will that ultimately, in dollars and cents, impact the organization potentially? So this forces you to dig deeper onto the things that you really want. And, you know, the next question digs deeper into what do you fear will happen if you ask for a raise or claim credit for your work. And how do you feel when you think about approaching a high stakes conversation or discussion? So, you know, this will kind of uncover some of our, you know, insecurities or challenges that we have individually, or really just look at, hopefully with a finer lens, the areas that we really need to dig deeper in and to get more clarity on. And so I hope, you know, at the very least that you take a look at this communication plan, that you really take the time to reflect on some of these questions, because when we're truly honest with ourselves is when we can start making these critical shifts. And so, you know, some of the do's and don'ts in here may seem very, you know, oh, I've already heard that before, I already knew that. But when you start uncovering where your challenges are, now you know when you need to exercise those do's and don'ts more, you know, thoroughly. Okay, I think I've made my point clear. I'll move on. And so I want to talk about, and maybe I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see me bigger for a little bit. And I want to go into the next section, and that's about being assertive and confident. And there are a lot of, you know, a lot of these lessons kind of overlap with themselves. And so there's a little bit of going back and forth, but Jennifer brings up this term in here about, you know, when she's trying to be assertive in a meeting, and she talks about this a little bit in the prior video too, but about committing career suicide, right? That she might be committing career suicide if she, you know, is too assertive in a meeting, or she brings up a point that's in contention with what everybody else believes, and that's really holding her back. And has anyone ever thought that before, right? You know, that you're really potentially sabotaging your career if you bring up a point that maybe everybody else is it doesn't seem to be in contention with it. So you're the only one. So do you speak up or do you not? And, you know, I can see some of you are agreeing with me that this is a tricky thing for a lot of us. And really, how do we build the confidence to speak up in these moments? And really, confidence is built one skill at a time. And the best way that we can build our confidence up is getting to know our colleagues better and within our organization. It's really building our relationships with the people who we surround ourselves with, so we can better understand the challenges that they're faced with, how what we do overlaps with one another, and how we can help serve them better, how we can improve our work to make their job easier. And that's a really, I know something that Marina specifically was challenged with when she went to IGT for the very first time. You know, they're a gaming technology company, the world's largest gaming technology company. And she didn't have any experience in gaming. She didn't know anything. She knew nothing of the acronyms that were being used. She didn't. So she was really coming into this role where, you know, she took the first 90 days and didn't implement any changes. She just sat back and really took that time to get to know the environment, to get to know her colleagues. And, you know, it really made me think about when I got into the financial planning industry, was my first career out of college, and I knew nothing about the industry. I took a finance class in college, but I did not do well in it at all. I didn't even know what a mutual fund was. But I knew that I wanted to help people, and that I was passionate about, you know, helping them achieve their financial success and being a catalyst for that. And coming from being a math major, you know, solving problems was a very natural thing for me. So to be able to work with people one-on-one, building relationships was just a natural part of my personality. And, you know, not knowing anything about financial planning was just a hiccup, right? I could learn that over time, but it really shook my confidence up. It took me a good 2 years, I remember, to really build my confidence up in that space, because I knew nothing about the field, but I really faked it till I made it. And I know that, when I heard Marina talk about that, and I thought about my own career, when I first took that job, my first day, we had these really tiny little cubicles, and I sat across from somebody, and I had somebody to my left and I had somebody right behind me, and there was no backdrop to the cubicle. So I could literally see that person's face across from me at all times. And I leveraged that as much as possible. I would ask this person questions, privately. I got to know who he was. And that was the first person who I felt comfortable with sharing, the daily challenges that I had about not knowing where does this go and how does this go. And he never made me feel like I was bothering him. And that, I didn't necessarily say I took advantage of it, but I, leveraged it as much as possible, because, it seemed like he was happy to help. And so that was my first place where I started to build this relationship with people. And then after feeling comfortable with him, I went to the person to my left. And I definitely went to the person to my left when I felt like I maybe was asking him too many questions. I would then gear my questions to somebody else so I didn't overwhelm him. But then I finally built a confidence up to start going to a more senior advisor who had been with the company for many years, was a top advisor in the company. And I started figuring out, how did he get to this company? How did he get here? And how does he build his clients now? And how did he get where he was? And that, helped me tenfold be able to grow and build our relationship within the office, and really started to build that community and my confidence up, so that now I had, people who were on my team, we were working together versus just being the new person who didn't really know much. And so, Marina talks about going to each department head and, getting to know them in their job, understanding their work and how that overlaps, and just sitting back and learning as much as you can about other people. And I think that is something that we all can really take to heart and be very mindful of. And I think it's really a natural tendency that most of us, could easily adopt in. And the idea is about, really taking the time is really the first step in building influence. And so we'll talk about building influence here in a little bit, and a little bit further. But it's really taking the time, and she brings up this idea of pre-selling ideas in a meeting. So I want to talk about that. I want to dig into that piece, because it is such a critical component that has served me and so many people so well. And I think probably most of us, and maybe you can tell me in the chat box if you're doing this already, but this idea of pre-selling an idea. And really it's about, if you have an idea that you want to have implemented in the workplace, and you've got a meeting about it coming up, and maybe it's a meeting with one person, maybe it's a meeting with 5, 10, 20, whatever it may be, and you want to present something. Well, before you even think about stepping foot into that meeting to present, you need to pre-sell this idea before that meeting. And all that is going up to, is identifying who in that meeting are the most influential, and potentially who may be the most combative or loudest. Doesn't have to be necessarily the most influential, but that also may sabotage you or potentially might say something. So you typically know who these people are in advance. And so you can go to their office or their desk before the meeting, and all you say is this simple thing that says, hey, I've got an idea for the meeting, and I really want to run it by you. Do you have a few minutes to hear it and potentially shoot some holes through it? And so what you're doing is you're positioning them as somebody who you value and that you think has important information that you would want to know in advance, and you're getting them on your side because they're probably going to give you some pieces of feedback that hopefully you hadn't, that you can incorporate into your pitch, that you can incorporate into the idea that can make it better. And so now when you go to present this idea in the meeting, that person is now 100% supportive of you because you've already included them in. They already agreed with your idea. And if you implement their idea or what they suggested into your pitch, you're totally going to have their support. And so I don't know if you do this already or have done it. You probably have and not really recognized it, but it is such an important critical component. And I was doing it before, but now I do it relentlessly because it works so well. And even if I have to have 3 or 4 conversations prior to a meeting, I do it because it's worth it. And so some people may be hesitant because you're like, oh, that's going to take too much effort or time. But to know that your idea is going to get implemented because you've already got buy-in from the critical players in the room, it's worth every second. And so, that's really this idea. It's a simple saying, hey, I've got an idea that I'd love to run by you. Maybe you could shoot some holes through it. Do you have a couple minutes right now or, before the meeting where I could tell you this idea? And so it's a finite request. It's not this big, huge, they're going to really appreciate that you value their opinion, and then you can implement it in the meeting. So that's the idea behind pre-selling. And it's really incredible. And a critical component to being assertive and confident is getting the buy-in from the other people on your team. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about in regards to this section? I want to dig into the workbook. So let me dig into the workbook a little bit because in this section as well, there is, when it comes to being assertive and confident, you usually can tell, you think, you look at somebody and you're like, gosh, that person's really confident. And I actually get that a lot. People are like, you are the most confident person that I know. I wish you could be like you. And to be honest, I am really, for the most part, really really challenging a lot of times on this. It's taken a really long time, and I still second guess so many things that I do. But the fear of not following through or not doing something that I say I'm going to do, the fear of that is way worse for me than the fear of failure. And so that has always forced me to do things that maybe other people wouldn't do. And it has served me extremely well, but it does not mean that I do not have any fear about that situation. Do not get that wrong. Like normally before I step out on a stage, I have already sweated through my undershirt or whatever, and I am about to pass out and I'm super nauseous, and usually any sort of high stakes conversation, because I care so much about that outcome. And so I really am just managing that fear. So, don't assume because somebody is exuding confidence that they are not, still dealing with some of the same challenges that you are. They're just maybe doing a better job of managing it. And a tip that has really served me incredibly well, and it's in this box right here. And I remember the woman who told me this, and the second she gave this idea, I immediately implemented it, and it made me feel a million times better. Because if you find yourself focusing on a lot of the mistakes that you made throughout the day, or that you didn't really let things go as easily as you would have hoped, and it's really undermining your confidence potentially and impeding your growth, there are really 2 tips that can help you reframe the situation. One is at the end of your workday, it's tracking 3 successes, big or small. This is what I have implemented consistently, and it has really transformed the way I feel about what I have accomplished every day. So for me, you know, I'm in the entrepreneurial world now, and so, but I remember in the corporate world, still, there's endless amounts of projects and things that you could be spending your time on every day. So it's very easy to leave your job and to feel like you didn't do enough, and to always feel like you're behind, and always feeling overwhelmed and stressed. And so, you know, when I got this suggestion to just track 3 successes, big or small, that happened that day, that shifted my mindset in such a simple way into a success mindset. And so when I leave the day, if I know I accomplished 3 things, big or small, I know that I did really well. And if I didn't accomplish 3 things that day, sorry, there's the fighter jet going over outside of the office. I know that if I didn't accomplish 3 things, then I need to work a little bit more. And that's actually a time where I need to push it, because maybe I did slack off that day more than I should. And so if I didn't get 3 things done, then I know I need to do more. I remember after having my little girl, it just magnified even more what I wasn't doing, because I was spending so much time with her, that I wasn't getting a lot of other things done. And even then, I remember, like, some of my successes I was tracking was like washing my hair. Like, if I washed my hair that day, that was a success, because that didn't happen very often. And so, you know, remembering that, you know, these successes that we have doesn't have to be corporate, you know, business related. It can be personally related too. And that can help us feel like, okay, we're at least doing something. The second tip here is, if you have a meeting that feels to have gone wrong, or a past failure that you just aren't letting go, remember that these moments are our biggest learning opportunities, and that failure is never final. And I had a situation today. I had a huge meeting with one of the largest companies out there today, which I thought was going to go one way and very positive. And like that, it was dive bombing. And I remember in the moment being so taken off guard and feeling really disappointed and upset. But I learned so much from that, and I now have recognized that I didn't necessarily lose this opportunity yet. There now are 2 other things that I can do to potentially save it. And if I just follow through enough, I know that I can win this back. And if I lose it, I lose it. But I know that the partners who I'm working with, who are on this phone call, that saw my grace under fire and are going to see my commitment to this project, and even if it doesn't go through, I know that I'm leaving with my head held high, and that they're going to know that I'm willing to do the work to get through it. And so knowing that, and even just saying it out loud, even further helps me, you know, be okay with the fact that that situation didn't go as any of us had expected. So, you know, it's so much of this is a mind game. And so that's why we have to really work together to help each other, you know, realize that we can support each other through some of these challenges. And that I even talked about it with a girl that I had a coffee with after the meeting. And she really was like, so, you know, what do you think she was going through? Because the person who was very combative was like, you know, there must have been something that happened to her that day that made her act so differently than she was before. And so to not take it personally, and to realize that it probably was just not the right moment at the right time for her. So, you know, I'm hopeful, but, you know, and so I'm not taking that as an opportunity as a failure today. There's a lot that we can pull from it. So the 3 successes, if you haven't been doing that, do that. It's really going to serve you well. All right. So let me check if there's any questions. questions real fast in the chat box? I don't see any right now, but I do know that there was a question earlier in the next section. So the next section is about effectively expressing yourself and being influential. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen again so that I'm large. And so Marina talks about influence in the video, about influence not being about me. And that in order to build influence, you have to have trust. And for her, because she was new to IGT when she got hired on, it went back to this not making any changes in her very first 90 days of being with the company, because she really needed to build those relationships up and know that she wasn't just going to come in there and just start reorganizing the company, because she knew she really wanted to be thoughtful about it. And that's how she was able to build influence and to spend the time getting to know her colleagues on a deeper level. And she wasn't afraid to make mistakes and really follow through with any items after a meeting with the team or an individual. Like, how are you going to move the team or an individual forward in a positive way? And making sure that it was very clear that when you're implementing change, when you are talking about yourself, that you really are coming about how this is going to impact us as a whole, and why we're doing things, and coming with it from that lens. And this may seem very simple and like a no-brainer, but let me tell you that this is the #1 mistake that I see people make, and that's not following up on agenda items. You know, if you say you're going to do something, you have to follow through. And you may say, oh yeah, I do that. But if I really think back, like, there are, because we do so many things, because we're juggling a million things, things fall through the cracks a lot of the time. And so I know for me in particular, that is definitely an area that I have to work on, and I have to set sometimes multiple reminders on my phone for certain situations. And if I don't write it down, I will not remember. And so sometimes I'm writing post-it note after post-it note, so I make sure I get to it. And if I do make a mistake, I fess up and I say, look, I made this mistake. I put it into my calendar wrong. Whatever I did, I'm going to own it. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make it up if I do make a mistake. And you know, it's really not possible to get everything done that we need to. But if you are, you know, trying to build influence in a new organization, or you're trying to get up there, these are the situations where you have to utilize a communication plan, write down what your follow-up actions are, set reminders in your phone if you need to. I mean, I get, this isn't, you know, another situation altogether, but I mean, this just kind of further emphasizes how often people don't follow through. Is every time I speak to a crowd, I always am very open about people being able to reach out to me, and that I want to connect with them, and that they should leverage, you know, if they have a question or if they want my input on something, to reach out to me. And so I always give out my card, I always give out my information. And I know at my last session, I had almost 400 people there, 140 people had raised their hand and submitted their information to me to follow up directly. I sent them all an email to follow up with me, and none of them did. None of them responded. I even had probably 20 people come up to me to speak to me afterwards about a situation, and I remember at least a good, you know, 5 people who I'm like, just email me, I can help you here, I have something. And they're like, yes, I will absolutely email you. I have gotten 0, you know. And I wish I could say that this was just a one case situation, but this has been happening since the very first time I've ever spoken to a crowd. Like, it's just a consistent challenge I have. It seems to be, you know, I seem to have this challenge more with women than I do men. I don't necessarily know why. It feels that way. Maybe that's an inaccurate, you know, thought, but I just, you know, I think it's such a simple way to stand out in the crowd, and all you have to do is follow through with what you say you're going to do. Like, it's that simple. And it's the easiest way to build influence. And I 100% know that's why I've gotten where I have in my career, because so few people do it. And when people do, when I do follow up, they're surprised and I get it done. And if I don't get a response to an email and I follow up one time, I don't take that as rejection. I used to take it as rejection until somebody told me that they actually take it as a test. They test people by not responding after a first email because they want to make sure that this person is really committed. And if they are, they'll follow up twice. And so ever since I've heard that, I do it. And I cannot tell you how many opportunities have come through because I've been the one to follow up with them multiple times. And it's frustrating and it's annoying, but you do it anyway. And it's the fastest, easiest way to build influence and to really position yourself as a leader. I know that Marina had suggested to Jennifer to set 30 minutes aside on her calendar every week to just connect with her colleagues. And I know that behavior, I mean, the very first time she did that, she had connected with, I think, 2 or 3 people that she had set up meetings with over the next month to just reconnect with, people who she hadn't talked with, 2 people in her company, 1 person outside of her company who she had just met at a conference. I can't remember 100% where the relationship came from, but she reached out to the person on LinkedIn and just say, hey, I hadn't talked to you in a long time. I'd love to connect with you for 30 minutes and catch up, and tell you about what I'm doing and some of the things that I'm, looking to do in the future. And it didn't happen right away, but later on, that person that she had talked to was a professor at a university, and she remembered that Jennifer had talked about how she really wanted to start giving back and teaching and kind of because that was a really big part of what she was doing earlier on in her career, was really, she was doing a lot of programming. And so she got hired on to teach a class because she had this connection with this person at a university. Now she was teaching a course of C++ programming at her local university that she had always been wanting to do. And it was because she had set this 30 minutes aside on her weekly calendar to follow up with her people that she knew, 2 people inside her company and 1 person out. And so it was just really cool to watch not only her transform throughout the 6 months of the mentorship that we filmed, but that even see the further, impact that it's had on her career moving forward. And I'm also super happy to announce that she just had her first child. She had a little baby girl last week. And so it's just super exciting for her and her husband, and that we've been able to stay connected over all this time, and that she's really stepped into her career path and still being able to accomplish all the things that she was unsure of so many years ago. So let's dig into the workbook a little bit as well. So I highly suggest, while I pull up this workbook, that you schedule time on your calendar to do this. And let's see, this is the section on effectively expressing yourself and being influential. So, there's some really great do's and don'ts here. Blame and gossiping. I mean, geez, it's such an easy, I fell victim to this because it was the easiest way to connect with people. Is when you are talking about somebody else, when they've done something wrong or they made a mistake, or maybe even sometimes what they're wearing, or I blame the media and magazines and just kind of our culture for why that seems to be the very first thing that comes to my mind, like negative things when I see something. So I have to, now that I realize that when I connect with people over a negative thing and I use that as my point of connection, nothing good ever comes from that. And the relationships that I was building were not making me feel better or growing as a person. And so now I do not engage at all in those types of conversations, especially in a working environment. And if somebody is telling me something negative about something, I usually try and I want them to feel heard because they're telling me because maybe they're upset about something. And then I try and shift it to talk about why they may have done that. Maybe there's a reason why they did that versus just blaming or talking negatively. Like, if there's something about that person that I know that I can help shed light, or maybe they really didn't mean it. Maybe something else was going on. And so that has been something that's really helped position me, just not going in that vibe, right? And so they don't come to me for those types of conversations anymore. And I hope that shows them how to behave differently, that you can change these conversations. And I know, because I used to be like that, and now I don't. And so if we can change this one by one, we can really, really grow. I know that I did. And so another do is to like have skin in the game. So how can we really help move projects forward, taking ownership of situations? How can we be a valuable asset to an organization? Thanking people and expressing gratitude, being respectful when we disagree. So, being really thoughtful around that, when something's not done the right way. Being an advocate for other people. And this last one is don't focus as much on being liked, but rather than being reliable and respected. And, I want to be liked. I want to be respected and reliable too. So, this has definitely been a harder thing for me, the likability part, and that having to overcome some of that, and knowing that people aren't always going to be, drawn to my personality type. And so, but it doesn't mean that we still can't work well together. And so how can we leverage, situations where maybe we don't necessarily like each other personally, but we still need to work well with one another. And again, these are things that are going to help us build influence. And definitely I all of that's going to help, with, building and not being afraid to be vulnerable and being honest about key things that are going on in our life. I know we talked about that in module 1 in particular, and how we have to bring that together, and participating in organizations outside of our company. So being a leader in the community, being a part of networking groups, attending events. You should be at least a part of at least one organization outside of your company. It's how you can start positioning yourself as a leader, getting to know other positions, you're networking, you're learning more about what's out there, and who knows what other future opportunities might be out there. I love this true false. This is a fan favorite. This is definitely something that people have said have been some of the most powerful parts of the whole program. Is just answering the simple true false. So do that. Add up your truth statements and see, how much influence do you really have? And what are 3 actions you can take right now to impact your influence and commit to? So let's talk about the next section. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And this is about collaborating successfully. And, Marina talks about, as women, we really do have this intrinsic need to build communities, and how, a lot of us may believe that this may be a difficult thing to do in the workplace, but really this is the perfect place to do it. We have to have this collaborative mindset in order and build this community inside of our workplace if we want any chance of feeling supported when we go through some of these challenges. She talks about how we can help each other, how we can collaborate successfulare. And the number one way that Marina does it is by being really relentless about acknowledging other people that are doing a good job, or that she's worked with that really surprised her. And and letting them know how valuable they were to the team, but more importantly, also making sure that their boss knows how valuable they were to that project. And so she said that she's relentless about sending notes. And so as a leader, that's a critical thing for you to do to build influence, to collaborate successfully, but also to not be afraid to ask for that level of recognition. And so she asked Jennifer for her, because she had recently worked on this really great project that she was a really big part of, and Marina told her that she needed to ask for recognition. And coincidentally enough, that same day, the person who she worked on this project with sent her an email thanking her for her contributions. And, and she replied back in her normal way that she normally would by saying, "Thank you, it was my pleasure." But because Marina had asked her to get credit for her work, she had added just 7 words. And it was these simple words of, "Would you mind letting my boss know?" That's all she did. She added, "Would you mind letting my boss know?" to this email. And she got a response within 30 seconds saying, "Absolutely. And even more so, I'm going to add you in the white paper and give you credit in this white paper that they're writing about the results that they discovered." And so just like that, in a very simple way, she was able to politely, discreetly ask to get credit for her work. And so you're not bragging, you're not shouting it from the rooftops like we see a lot of other people sometimes do in the workplace. We're doing it in a way that hopefully resonates with what seems like something that could be really easy for you to do. And this is going to come back tenfold. And, to take this even further, you can, if you're doing this for other people, just automatically making sure their boss knows. I love writing reviews on LinkedIn, for other people. It's, again, something super simple, super easy, and they are so appreciative of it, and it makes them, I always read the recommendations of people who are trying to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to hear what other people say about them as a leader or how they contributed to the team. And so it's a really easy thing that we can do. You don't have to do a million of them, but I think it's about adding it to your weekly reminder, just like setting aside time to keep up your connections at work. Maybe it's adding on a weekly reminder to keep up with your connections, to schedule these meetings with them, but also to make sure you get credit for your work and that you're giving credit to other people for the good work that they do. And whether that's sending an email to their boss or writing a recommendation on LinkedIn. And as far as the workbook goes in this section, there was definitely a really great section here. So, again, being an active listener, not interrupting, don't interrupt people. When you step on someone verbally, you're stepping over a line, which can be interpreted as aggressive and can create tension. And so you can say, if someone tries to interrupt you, you can say, "Just a moment, please, I'm not quite done. I want to finish my point." My husband and I have to do this all the time with one another, right? Because we're thinking about what we want to say next and we overstep them. We don't give them the time to talk. So this definitely overlaps with our personal life as well. But I was at this Forbes event in LA a couple weeks ago, and this woman was like telling me, I have this trick that I do in board meetings or any meeting where she sees another woman who is giving an idea, and then let's say someone else in the room, a man in the room, says the same thing, and he's the one that ends up getting credit for the idea and not her. And when she witnesses that, she 100% always makes sure and speaks up. Like, that's a time for her that she uses that to say, "Oh, Kelly, I love that idea." and points it back to the other person. So that way they get credit for their work, and you are acknowledging them, that it was her that said it first, and so it's a really simple way of just saying, Kelly, that's a great idea. And just kind of going back to giving her that she said it first. And so I thought that was a really great way of being a really influential leader, and helping each other out, and how we can, another easy way that we can be collaborative with one another, and help each other throughout this project. So I love that. I wanted to share that idea with you too. And, being strategic, and don't just disagree, and ask questions, and all the other really great things that are in the workbook that you should take a peek at. And the final lesson in this module is in regards to standing up for our worth and our value. This section really was handled so well in the videos that there isn't a big part in the workbook that goes into it. And we actually talk about it a lot more in another one of the modules too, so I didn't want to double dip on it, so I just left one video to really talk about that for this section. And it really is, it's starting off with Marina talking about how it takes us a long time as women, unfortunately, to really feel valuable to an organization, that we feel worthy, that we've done enough, that we've contributed enough to ask for our worth. We feel like we really have to do a million things. I fall victim to that all the time. Someone actually just called me out on it the other day for something that I really had never seen before. And it takes that sometimes, again, we have these blind spots, and unless other people tell us, we're never going to really know. And so Marina talks about the situation where a young woman comes into her office and says, I apologize, but I really haven't had a raise in a really long time, and I want to talk about it with you right now. And so Marina's like, whoa. Let me take my IGT hat off right now and just talk to you one-to-one as a mentor and say, don't ever apologize. If you feel like you deserve a raise, do not apologize. A man would never come in here and say, I apologize for this conversation I'm about to have. They would come in and ask for it. So this goes back to having the communication plan written out and detailing, asking for what you want, giving the reasons why, getting your facts straight on exactly why you deserve to get that raise, or whatever it is that you need to feel worthy. Maybe it's time off. Maybe it's not monetary. Maybe it's more flexibility. Maybe it's, I know for me, what I needed to feel valued is I wanted in my financial planning job, I asked for an extra 30 minutes at lunch on Fridays so that I could actually maybe work out for again in my life. I hadn't for so many years. I had been overworked and I was really stressed out, and I'm like, you know what? All I want is to take this one workout class, and it happened to be during the lunch hour, and so I need an extra 30 minutes so I have time to change and get back to work. And so I had to get clear on what it was that I wanted, and then be able to communicate that. Why is this so critical? Jennifer talks about a story about how she was up for a promotion. Really, she was going to step into this new role in a team. She had a conversation with her boss. It was, secured that she was going to step into the role. And then he has a meeting with her and says, hey, a few days later, and he says, I changed my mind. I'm going to hire external to the team. And she was shocked and upset. And she did say in the moment that she was upset and that she was disappointed, but she didn't really stand up for herself, because I think she was just so shocked in that moment, and she was hurt. But as time went on, she was even more hurt, and she was becoming resentful. And she knew, that if that happens, if we're in a situation where we're getting more and more upset, that is our barometer. That is our critical moment where we have to say something. This is when we have to speak up and we have to be loud. And so she had to really, try and take the emotion out of it, and really think about, why was she the best candidate for the team? How was she going to do that role in a way that was going to make this team progress in a more effective way? And she built her case. She requested that additional meeting and had this meeting with her manager. And she was able to say, I don't think it's best for the team to hire external. Here are my reasons why. And that she even said that she was hurt by it, and that it made her not feel valued. And fortunately, in this situation, it worked. And I love when Jennifer talks about how she was basically doing this conversation while staring at a wall, because if she looked at him face to face, she was going to probably cry. And she didn't want to cry. And she wanted to try and keep it together, so she wasn't able to make eye contact with him. So even when we have these difficult situations, these difficult conversations, even though we may be overwhelmed with emotions, by having her take the time and getting her facts straight, she was able to go have this conversation more deeply. And so, Marina says it best. She's like, when it's talking about standing up for your worth and your value, do not be afraid to be loud. And I can't emphasize that enough. And no one is going to hand you anything. I think about this from a company perspective, a financial perspective, probably because of my background, but I'm like, if somebody's going to work for me and for less money and do the same amount of work, why would I pay them more? I mean, I don't think that way myself personally, but I can see it from a company perspective and say, like, why would I pay that person more if they're willing to do the work for less money? Great, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to save money. But if you are able to appropriately establish your worth to the organization, what it is that you need to feel valued, and be able to stand up for it when there is a misalignment, that's the epitome of owning your voice. And, hopefully by choosing your time wisely, by remembering to take the time you need to get clear, by scheduling these meetings in advance, getting your facts straight, using your communication plan, building influence by collaborating successfully with your colleagues. These are all the little bits and pieces that are going to build the confidence we need to be assertive in these meetings where we maybe do need to, speak louder than we would have liked to, and getting credit for our work and being able to speak up. And listen appropriately so that we can really truly understand the job that we're in and what we can do to provide. And being very clear that we're not going to settle for anything less than our worth. And so that's everything that I wanted to cover today. I know we went a tiny bit over, but hopefully you stuck with me. I want to thank you for sticking with me. If you have any other questions, you absolutely can submit them. You can email them to Shavon@womenevolution.com, and I will answer those questions at our next live Q&A session, which I will announce in our Facebook page. If you haven't already, sign up to be a part of our private Facebook group. This way you'll get direct notifications. You may only get one email. I don't want to bombard you with a bunch of emails on these live Q&As. So you're also going to have, the list of all the past replays and be notified of the next ones coming up. And you can submit your questions that way, or you can email me, whatever's going to work. But I want to thank you for spending your valuable time with me. It was so awesome to see you. And I'll see you in November. All right. Bye-bye.